over the next few years, but it's about what's delivered for that. And I think part of the pretty detailed discussions that Sports Scotland and SFA have been engaged in is about the transparency and targets and delivery around youth development, numbers coming through, quality of provision of that training and support, and to make sure that that is a quality product for every young person, no matter where they're accessing the development programme. And good work's been done, but I think there's more to be done. And that's been a very useful and open discussion we've had.
It's interesting, isn't it? It might be quite interesting to hear the views of maybe some of the smaller clubs in all of this as well, because clearly there's very different kind of realities in terms of the facilities offered. Nanette, do you want to
follow on from the Minister? What sort of numbers, just to give me some perspective, what sort of numbers are we actually talking about going into these development squads, if you like, and what percentage of those, in the end of the day, would end up with a professional footballing career? Is it possible to say that?
Well, there's 6 teams within the development. It starts from under 11s, under 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s and 17s. 17s your dual age band. At each age group you're allowed to register 20 boys or 20 young players. Not every team exercises that right to sign and register 20 players. Underneath that as well, clubs have got player or age groups at under 8s, under 9s and under 10s, where the boys play with their boys club. They train with their boys club, but they also come in to get some elite training as well there. So really that is the setup regarding youth development. And at the end of that, the players, on average you usually take maybe 8 players full time each year, at the end of under 16 or under 17 when they're eligible to leave school there. So I said there is a dropout there, but at the same time there's opportunities there as well to live their dream really, and that is to be a professional footballer, and the clubs try and provide that.
I think at the younger end of that, the sort of 8-9-year-olds you were saying, are they prohibited from playing football, say, in their school team and things like that?
No. So they would play with their boys club, and again, I think obviously Rangers would be the same as ourselves. The philosophy behind, obviously, each club takes this holistic approach into developing. It's not for Celtic or Rangers to dictate to boys clubs or there. We've got to work hand in hand with them, and we've got to work with the schools, with the FA, with the SPL, and really we've got to work together to try and get this approach, to try and make it better. But at the same time, the boys club from under 11s down, if they're not in the registration form, the boys clubs dictate to ourselves, and we're delighted at that, because the boys clubs would tell us we need them on such a night, and they would play with us on like a Saturday, and we would try and work with the boys clubs to there. One is to try and build up a rapport. One is to get a good name about the club in which you're working, because it might be that if we take a boys club away and we act as though we're a bigger club than yourself, then they could produce 2 or 3 excellent players the following year, and they might not want to deal with Celtic. So it's really important, the image of the club and how we operate is paramount to the development of the club and of the player.
I'm encouraged to hear that, because I did have a concern that I do think that sort of social development is very important as well at that age, and that even playing with their peers and interacting with their friends and things would be very important. And I was a bit concerned that we're losing that, but you're reassuring me that that's not in fact the case.
No.
Thank you.
In terms of schools football, what are the rules in terms of boys playing schools football?
The performance level clubs take a view that the youngsters in their charge shouldn't play schools football. Principally the reason for that is, by and large, they would be with that club 4 nights a week and on a Sunday for a game, which in anybody's language is a massive commitment, notwithstanding they have homework and everything else to do. Also the issue around, if we are indeed dealing with the elite young players, they should be given a consistent and not a conflicting message about how they develop as young players. Excuse me. And I think we would find that many of our young players would welcome the fact that that decision is taken out of their hands, and they are not press ganged by anyone else to play. I can't use the argument the other way though. You're going to come back and say to me that that element of choice should exist, and that is a view that is out there, of course. of course.
Can maybe Tam Bailey and Shona Robertson comment on this one, because I know this is one that gets brought up a lot of the time. And if we're talking about the interest of the young person being paramount, and I think everybody's agreed on that, where is that in relation to this issue? Tam and then Shona.
It's quite straightforward. These are unacceptable restrictions on young people's choices. Now, I accept that the clubs are putting a heavy investment into those children and young people, but by the same token, they have a right to make decisions, they have a right to actually make choices on their own basis, and I find it quite unacceptable that we put that kind of restriction on young people's development. Particularly for those young people who may not be experiencing, having a good experience at the club, and they are still subject to those very tight restrictions in terms of where else they might be able to play. Now, I know there's a balance to be struck, but for me, that's an unacceptable restriction. Can I just say something else, though? I welcome the comment with regard to a code of guidance coming from Neil Doncaster, but these are hopes, aspirations and dreams that we're dealing with, and that puts a very heavy onus of a duty to care for our children and young people. And I think that actually from the Scottish Football Association, there's a particular responsibility to set the standard, to make sure that that duty of care, which I know will be part of the review group because it's part of the recommendation, that's really important. And that's where you're able to get a reasonable balance about what is the expectations on the child or the young person as they're going through their training programme. So these are really issues that I think could be taken into account through the review group, which you've already heard is about to be set up.
Minister, then
just to give it maybe slightly wider context, I know that we're very focused on the youth football initiative here because of the petition, and out of the 2,700 people in boys in total who are going through that, only around 4% go on to professional football. So it's really important, in my view and the government's view, that we also see football in its wider context in terms of recreation. And it might be of interest to the committee, for example, if you look at the Active Schools contribution to football, nearly 1 million football sessions have been delivered through schools, through the Active Schools network. So there is a wider context to football, while we understand why we're here and why we're focusing on the initiative. The funding that the Scottish Government puts in is very much from the view of a lifelong interest, not just for those boys who are lucky enough to go into professional football, which is a tiny number of the boys and girls who will play football through schools and, hopefully an amateur level beyond. And I think we've got to remember that's also of huge importance.
I mean, given that's the case, I wonder if you could respond to the question about, do you think it's acceptable that young people are stopped from playing schools football if they're involved with clubs? I mean, do you, as a Minister for Sport, think that this is acceptable?
I think that's something we need to look at, quite honestly. I think there's a number of issues emerging this afternoon that are worthy of closer examination. I suppose my worry is it's the situation of putting all your eggs in one basket, and if that basket for the 96% that don't go on to play professional football is found not to be all that they thought and aspired and hoped that it would be, we've got to think about how we ensure that for those young people that there's something there, that they don't lose interest in football entirely, that there's a support mechanism there, that may be through the school football, maybe through playing at an amateur level, but I think there is an issue there that we need to look at.
Yes, Catherine.
On that particular point, I think I sort of was sort of in my head thanking you, Minister, for bringing us back to exactly focusing in on just the very small group of people, children that we're talking about that are going to be, signing these forums. But then I was disappointed with your second part of the answer, because I really wanted to focus this question to Tam Bailey and about the choices, and I 100% agree that young people should be able to make informed choices about what they're going to be doing for the rest of their life. But surely, if you're talking about this very small group of children who are getting the opportunity to go into train as what's going to be an elite athlete. And if, as Mr Sinclair said, they're going to have to give up 4 nights and 1 day, so there's only 7 days in the week, and they're given 5 days to try and become this elite athlete. Surely that choice is made at the beginning of the season, and you make that, you make that choice at that time. And the young person, from what we've heard today, at any time has got the choice to move away and become that free agent again. So can I put that point? I mean, are you saying that to make that choice at the start of a season isn't enough? A young person should be able to make that choice throughout the school year, for example? I
mean, we've already heard that children or young people's circumstances change, and so can their particular outlook, so can their experience of being with that club. So yeah, I think that they should be given the space to actually change their minds during that period of time. You might want to build in the same kind of notice that the clubs will give the young person, so there's equity to the agreement that they've come to. But yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable that people change their mind as the year unfolds.
Didn't they stop them changing their mind? They can walk away at any point in that year, and this wouldn't just be for football though, Tam. It would be for any young person going into an elite sport. If you're going into you want to become an elite athlete, you have to sacrifice something, and it wouldn't be healthy for a young person to be training with this club 5 days a week and then going on and doing something the other 2 days of the week that was a physical...
Well, there's probably going to be precious little time left in the week if they're training for that amount of time. So therefore, why would you want to put that heavy restriction on that young person for a whole range of activities? I mean, it's not just about schools football, but why would you do that if they're already being trained to that level? As they go through particularly the later stages, because we know that to achieve the amount of training time for them to become the elite athlete, they will going to have to commit to 4-5 times a week.
I just feel that the governing bodies and the clubs seem to be saying that all isn't perfect and we could get something better, and it seems to me to be a weak part of the argument if we're saying that this has to, there has to be this choice at every stage. There has to be a point when you make a choice and say, well, I'm going to commit to this for the few months that the season is.
Already welcomed the fact that they're going to review it, and both bodies are saying that they're going to review it. There are checks and balances that they'll have to take into account, and I'm particularly interested in how they'll exercise the duty of care, particularly when they're dealing with hopes, aspirations, and I said earlier, and dreams of young person, because the prizes are very, very significant. So we have to deal with it in a really sensitive way to make sure that people, children, young people, and their parents are aware of what they're letting themselves in for. So yeah.
Can I ask Ms Stuart Regan and then I think Mr Sinclair and then back to you, Minister.
Thank you. I think this is a really interesting point as far as this whole debate is concerned, and a fundamental point for me. I think Cathy Craigie makes some excellent points around this whole issue of developing successful players for the future. This is around talent development, and talent development is so important. This country invests millions into sport, some for participation, but also some for performance, for winning, to try and get this country to develop the very best athletes. And this is not peculiar to football. My experience in cricket and also in athletics has shown that you cannot burn a young child out. You have to manage the development quite carefully. And if you have an elite performer who is at the very best academy, getting the very best training, the people providing that are best placed to advise on what training that young person should do without overdoing it, and managing back on non-essential training in order to succeed and fulfill their potential. I think is important, and actually, in many ways, is the duty of care which Mr. Bailey is asking for. You know, we as the SFA don't want the child to carry out too much sport. We would prefer the experts, the professionals, to provide the right level of development. And if we, and let's not forget, we're not talking about every child here. There are some 2,500 children going through the Youth Action Plan, of which a smaller percentage are in the performance level, i.e. the elite level. They are the ones where their time is being managed, but they are the ones who could be our future international players. We've got to treat them with kid gloves.
Okay, Mr. Sinclair, and then
Mr. The point just made by Mr. Regan there, that we're not all about performance as a nation. We have to be about participation. We have to be about getting everybody up off the chair and doing what they can. It would seem to me that rather than afford yet another choice for these already chosen ones, if you like, who are within the Youth Initiative programme, is it not an ideal opportunity for us to get the other kids who would never have had an opportunity to play and represent a school team to have an opportunity to do that? And I think that's probably, from my previous life at the SFA, that was one of the main thrusts that we were about, that if all these other kids were taken away, surely there's an opportunity for others then to put a school strip on who would never have had that chance.
I suppose one of the questions that springs to mind is there are many young people all over Scotland involved at different levels of sport. Some of them involved at elite sport, and out with football. And there aren't the same kind of restrictions on these youngsters. So, the question is, you can develop young elite sports people without the kind of restrictions that are being put on them. That is the kind of key difference, it seems to me, between,
understand fully.
what we're talking about
I just think that having had 4 nights a week and a game with growing young bodies, I think anybody would argue, most people would argue, I'm sure, that would suffice. Rather than us losing a choice here, we're actually gaining a choice, and the other young kids should now have the opportunity to represent. That's the point I'm trying to make.
The key role is at the duty of care here with young people that are under 16 in the element of choice. Robin, you wanted to come... Oh, no, sorry, Minister, and then Robin, would you like to come in?
Just very briefly, Convener, it's just to say there's actually no disagreement at all with what Cathy Craigie was saying. I think at elite performance level, in whatever sport you choose, the young person clearly makes a major commitment, and there is a duty of care on those surrounding that young person to make sure that they're not being pulled in all directions. I think the point I was trying to make was that I think there needs to be better support for that young person at the point in which it becomes obvious that they're not going to be in that as a professional within that sport, and I'm not sure that's as good as it could be in terms of what the other options are available for that young person, whether that's school sports, school team, the amateur team locally. I think we need to get better at supporting that person otherwise we might lose them to the sport, which would be a shame.
Can I just say before I bring you in, Robin, when I was Sports Minister, I visited several of the Premiership teams in England that had sports academies at the time before they were being developed in Scotland, and I was particularly struck at Liverpool at the time. I think it was Steve Hyland, I don't know if he's still there, but they were very cognisant of the fact that only a tiny proportion of the youngsters were going to go on and have professional careers, and they were very concerned at looking at, for example, of careers in refereeing. And I think that would be interesting to hear, what people's views are around about that. I'm conscious I'm kind of going off the point a little bit, but in terms of the kind of opportunities for youngsters and putting youngsters at the centre of this, I think that's maybe an area that's worth looking at. Sorry, Robin.
Thank you, Convener. Two brief questions. Now, I'm forming an impression, which might be entirely wrong, that the young people going through this elite scheme, 4 days of training a week and a game a week, that this is hard training and is, in a sense, fairly restrictive. And I get the impression that they do not or have very little access to the idea of just playing football for the fun of it and just enjoying it for the fun of it. So you may want to respond to that. But the other also is that there has been, several people have mentioned aspiration and of playing for Scotland and playing for their clubs. Have any of these young people so far made it as far as, shall we say, the Scotland under-21s?
Well, first of all, the games are played in the context of a non-competitive spirit. So therefore, in essence, it should be about less stress, more fun, play for the sake of it, subs coming on and off. All these things have been factored in. I can't deny that there is a rigour attached to it, there's a seriousness attached to it, because it is a business after all. And we are charged with trying to produce young players, but we do make it as fun and as entertaining and as appropriate to their age group as we can. I would be abhorred if I thought I was presiding over something that didn't. Regarding the efficiency of it and what it's produced, it's been on the go now for some 11 or 12 years, so all the players who have come through Scottish football in that last period of time have effectively come through this programme. Now, it's very, very easy to have a pot at that and say we're not what we were, but there might be any one of a number of factors that could also have contributed to where we are currently, as opposed to the influence of the Youth Initiative programme.
Response to Robin's question? No? Okay. Yes.
I'd just like to go back again, just with Celtic. Celtic invest 1.5 million each year into its academy. Now, Celtic's main purpose is to create a Champions League player, international players there. The objective is to create this world-class academy where we excel in, as Jim said earlier, in the coaching, the sports science, the medical, the performance analysis, and really cover every aspect here to give each young player the opportunity and expose them to this opportunity. Again, backed up with the philosophy of the holistic approach. But the facts are that to create an elite athlete or to create an elite player, there's this 10,000 hours needs to be placed upon them. Now, Celtic have looked at this and developed a programme, a schools programme with St Ninians and Kirkintilloch, where the boys go up, they arrive at 7:30 in the morning, they train in the morning, they get their breakfast, their education, they have a meal, they do their education again when they get to Lennoxtown, and they train, they're back in the house. Now, these boys do 16 hours coaching per week at between the ages of 13 and 16. At the moment, we recognise that there needs to be this sort of partnership with schools. We also recognise as well, to attain the 10,000 hours, that what we're doing presently is not enough, and we need to look. So the demands on young players now, going back to the school football issue, could be greater than ever, regarding it as clubs now start to put more in way of development time, more in way of their social time. But the benefits of this system at the moment, which we've seen, is that boys are now getting to bed at 9 o'clock at night. They're getting more sleep. The discipline and of the players to get up each morning at that time, and they're now into their way, and we see great benefits in this. When I was younger, when I was 9, 10, I was a swimmer at Motherwell Speedo. Now, on an amateur sport, we used to get up in the morning, whichever, 3 mornings a week, at 6:30 in the morning, you would swim, then you would go to school, then you would swim at night, not for any payment, whichever, probably not even my dream at that time, because I always wanted to be a football player, but the dedication was there for individuals. Now, we need to put that dedication now on to young footballers there, because you see how individual sports, when they work hard at it, the rewards they can get individually, and obviously, objectively, as their career goes along with a strong base. And really, going back to the schools football issue, welfare is always paramount to any young player, but the success of the St Ninians project is really based on their education. Although we've looked on it that we'll expose them to more hours, but the education is paramount. These boys must leave school with no qualifications, because, as you rightly say, whether it's 4% or 10% is still too low in the success rate for young players. Now, they must have something to fall back on, and we must really work together. And again, I go back to the boys' clubs, I go back to the schools. There must be some sort of partnership where the boys are leaving with qualifications, they're leaving with alternative choices if they don't make it at football. But at the same time, clubs are leaving no stone unturned in trying to develop these individual players.
John.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon. There's a number of questions I'd like to ask, and they follow on from some of the answers have been given previously by members of the panel, and I just need to seek clarification before I develop some of the questions. We've heard a figure today from the Minister that says there's 2,700 approximately young people involved in the football development side of things under the age of 16. Is that correct? Is that how many are registered at the present moment with SFA?
Within the Youth Action Plan, the figure the Minister refers to is correct.
And that's how many are registered by football clubs with SFA at the present moment?
Within the Youth Action Plan, with its performance and initiative level, yes.
Right, because what I'm trying to get to, Convener, is how many young people are currently registered with the SFA by football clubs in Scotland? And you're saying that under the Youth Action Plan, there's 2,700 currently registered.
I can't answer that without going away and doing that specific research, because it's where you draw the line as to what you define as a football club. If you go right down into grassroots, there are tens of thousands of children playing the game on a regular basis. What we're looking at here at the Youth Action Plan level is the children registered with professional clubs at either performance level, i.e. the very top, the elite end, or initiative level, which is the sort of development, the next tier down, if you like, and that's the figure that the Minister refers to. But there are many, many more playing both at club level and at school level every day of the week.
I understand that. What I'm trying to get to is the point about how many young people are currently registered with either professional football clubs or others in relation to the petition that's before us today in terms of the restrictive practices that may apply to the freedom of movement of young people between clubs in Scotland.
Okay. Within the 2,700, there is a proportion of that, and I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, but it's a proportion of the 2,700 that are categorised, as Mr Sinclair said, at the performance level, the very elite end, primarily the Premier League clubs, where they are doing the 4 nights a week, where they are doing the weekend matches. They're the ones where largely the clubs themselves have got agreements in place that prevent the child from doing any more physical activity. And as I said before, in terms of developing the very best players, we believe that that is taking a duty of care to make sure that child doesn't burn out before they have fulfilled their potential.
Based on that, Convener, and I'm trying to extrapolate figures here in relation to how many children are registered with the SPL, because based on some of the figures, now, I think it was Mr McCarthy gave us a figure of 20 young people in each level are registered with Celtic Football Club, and I'm assuming that's the same with Rangers. So potentially there are 100 young people registered under the age of 16 and over the age of 11, or play with under 11s, are registered with both Rangers and Celtic, and that then will reflect on how other clubs, and I'm assuming based on that, in the SPL there should be roughly 1,000 young people registered with SPL clubs.
Sorry. Yeah, if they've all got 20 players registered per age group, which is not always the case.
It's a maximum,
yeah.
Because the Minister also gave a figure in terms of, out of the 2,700 that are registered, only 4% of those individuals may go on to play professional football. And the question really then leads on to, are we registering too many young people? Are we raising the expectations and aspirations of young people in terms of professional football? If we're saying that, in the Minister's words, that 96% of those young people that go through this process will never become professional footballers. And we may be, through some of the practices that are being employed by the clubs at the present moment, be stopping them from going on to do other sports because of the time commitment that's required. And Mr McCart, you gave an excellent example of when you were a youngster that you actually participated in club swimming events. And can we potentially be seeing football clubs restricting young people from taking up other sporting activities that they may excel at because their aspirations and expectations have been raised that they will eventually become a professional football player?
reality is that it's actually very difficult to determine at a young age quite how far any particular player is going to go. And you can identify players at maybe under 15, under 16 level who appear to be extremely talented at that age, but who never then come through the ranks, even though they may be well ahead of their peers at a particular age group. So you have to draw the line somewhere. I would be concerned if we were dramatically reducing the amount of numbers of players coming through the youth development systems that our clubs have, because so many players are late developers. And I think it's vital that the country has the maximum amount of talented young players to be able to come through the system, because there is a real tapering off, and if you don't have sufficient coming in at the bottom of a sufficient quality, you're not going to end up with the right number at the top.
In some respects, I accept that argument, but you did say, Mr Doncaster, yourself, that there are some late developers who may not have went through the youth development programme with the clubs, may not have been registered, who may be talent spotted playing on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning in a local park by a scout, and I know there are many scouts throughout Scotland who may identify to a club that there is a player that's playing in youth football that's not attached to a club, that may have great potential and may be taken up, and the clubs haven't spent the type of resources that Mr McCart indicated, that effectively, based on the figures Mr McCart gave me, I think it works out almost £15,000 a year Celtic Football Club are investing in terms of their youth development programme at the present moment at Parkhead. So it's really trying to get that though fixed in our minds, that while we have this youth development programme and the clubs are committed to it, that there may be other opportunities for young people to come through and play professional football that may not be through this route.
Perhaps respond by saying that right at the outset, the reason these children are part of elite academies is because they have a degree of talent. And that talent is then nurtured, and there comes a point at which a decision is made as to whether the child is going to go on to fulfil the potential as a footballer. But right the way through, there is an element of choice. The parents, the guardians sign up to that, and the child themselves are usually keen to pursue that footballing ambition, particularly if it means playing for one of the bigger clubs. The point you make about scouting is a very good one, but that happens all the time. Clubs have scouts, they're out there, and late developers are spotted and brought into the process. So I think what we're all trying to do is to make sure that we cast our net as wide as we can to make sure we do spot the real gems either at the outset or later on when they develop. But I would echo Neil Doncaster's point that reducing the numbers coming through the process at the outset would severely restrict our ability to develop long-term talent for the future of the clubs and the Scotland team.
Conversely, could the argument not be that £1.5 million, which we would mirror as well, is money that's been invested to make the experience of these young players who are involved in this programme of an excellent standard, as opposed to something else that could be provided or isn't currently?
That could be a converse argument, Mr Sinclair, but the point I'm trying to make is in relation to the expectations of a 10-year-old, because effectively that's what we're talking about. We're talking about signing up, then clubs registering 10-year-olds to take them through a programme which effectively could take them through a programme for 6-7 years. That at the end of that programme, they do not become a professional football player. And it's that aspect of the point I was trying to make in terms of aspirations and expectations, is that you do talent spot at 10, but they give a 6-year commitment, 7-year commitment to 4 nights a week and on a Sunday, to then find that they're no longer required in that sport at a professional level. And as I said, it's trying to get that message over to young people that they may not all succeed in relation to what's been asked of them at the present moment. And it is about how do they, when and how do they make a decision about changing their preferred sport, or in some cases I know that in some of the larger clubs there is a kudos of playing with Celtic or Rangers Boys Club, but there may even be a bigger kudos if they were to play with Albion Rovers or Wraith Rovers, because they might be guaranteed a game at the end of every Saturday afternoon, whereas they might not be guaranteed a game with Rangers or Celtic or some of the Premier League teams.
I think, John, you make some really valid points, and I think the jobs of these gentlemen, am I right, is an extremely difficult one, and having to look young players in the eye and tell them they don't have a future in the game is not something I would wish on anyone. Something I would wish on anyone. I think it's an extremely difficult thing to have to do, but unfortunately, that is the sad reality of the hard-edged nature of professional sport, and only the very, very best in any age group are going to make it through the system. I think there are things that can be done and are done to look after children's interests, and I know that all of the performance tier clubs, they make a lot of effort to ensure that those that aren't going to make it are catered for and are directed in different ways and given some sort of inspiration to perform elsewhere. I mean, one thing that we ourselves do is a day at the end of a year when, and at the end of each season, when those players who are going to be released are given a second chance, and there's an open day that we help support financially to ensure that those that aren't going to make it at the very top level with our clubs might have an opportunity either at a lower tier club within England or potentially elsewhere within Scotland. And a huge proportion of those lads that participate actually in those exit trials end up playing elsewhere and lower down the chain, and they find their level. But it's one of the real problems with professional sport.
Thank you, Convener. That's all the questions.
Thanks very much. Could I ask Trish Godman, have you got any questions?
A couple of comments, really, because most of my questions, in a sense, have been answered. 10, 11 years down the road, and a review is absolute. I mean, I think it's absolutely right. You do it, and obviously there's been a lot to come up. However, we're here because I think it's the 96% that don't get anywhere. So if I can separate that off. We're here because right at the very beginning, it seems to me, there are some things that need clarification. And my question, because I'm not clear, today it's been clarified publicly, the difference between a registration and a contract, and two totally different things, but these are bandied about in the wrong way. But I don't know who has the responsibility over the registration procedure. Is it you, Stuart, or is it you, Neil? I don't know. And it seems to me that when that happens right at the very beginning, because let's face it, everybody, all boys or girls, aren't going to end up 1.5 million quid behind them, either Celtic or Rangers. So we're looking at the smaller clubs that don't have that kind of money behind them, and we have to look at what happens to those kids. So first of all, a 28-day opt-out, which seems to be a question mark around, and I'm sure you told me that when I saw you, Neil, that there is a 28-day opt-out. So if you sign the registration form, you've got 28 days to change your mind. Now, I didn't make that up myself, right? So there is a school of thought that yes, that is the case, and there's a school of thought that no, it's not the case. So it seems to me that right at the very beginning, there is something not right. The second thing is that you do talk about this information is given to parents and it's given to the child, and the child can sign and the parent sign, or a carer or someone who's looking after the child. But I'm not sure that you could say to me 100% that every club actually explains that clearly to the potential, the wee boy or the wee girl. I'm sure that clubs like Celtic and Rangers maybe have a set-up where they can do that. So it seems to me that if it's the SFA or the SPL who are responsible for the registration procedure, there should be somebody there that is able to take the parent and the child through what that actually means. And what it means in terms of, do we have a 28-day opt-out or do we not? What does it mean when you sign up for a year? What does it mean when you become 15 and you're signed for another year and you might end up 16 and yeah, you might do very well? What does it mean when you're not doing very well? What does it mean when another club is interested but you don't know about it? And I think Jim's been right about needing that to be clarified. So it seems to me that right at the very beginning of this, where you've got a young, enthusiastic kid whose welfare has to be paramount through this whole procedure, needs to have it absolutely clear as far as the parents are concerned, and as much as possible what they can, if they're 11 or 15, they'll have different ways of absorbing the information, but it needs to be absolutely clear to them. And I think that if it's the SFA, for example, that are responsible for the procedures of registration, then you should take the responsibility of making sure there is a named person does that, either in every club or in the SFA, or I don't know which one of you two guys are responsible.
I'll try and respond to the first part of those good questions. Firstly, the 28-day opt-out, it's not something I'm familiar with at all. I read my name in the papers associated with a 28-day opt-out, and I've spoken to my colleagues, and I don't think the SFA have any awareness of it either.
Well, then I need to be certified, because I've got it written in my notes when I visited you, as you know, I came initially to talk about, and I've written down 28 the opt-out, because I remember thinking, geez, I never had that before. So we better beg to differ, but you can clarify whether it is the 28 days opt-out or not.
There isn't.
There is not.
No. There is a registration at the moment of any player is both at the SFA and at the SPL. I think there is actually a case for looking at whether that can be more streamlined and potentially one registration process. I think that's a fair point. I think I can't be naive and claim that every club explains in detail the ramifications of exactly what each young player is signing. I think that's realistic that some will and some may not be as good at it. I think we also need to recognise, and I've had plenty of young players sat in front of me signing forms. They are so delighted to be signing a form with their club that actually anything that happens in that room on that day goes right over their head. So trying to find some mechanism to get information across in a better way, I think, is a very valid point. And that's one of the things we try to address with this code of conduct that we're developing, to ensure that people do have a real understanding of what it means to be a young player associated with a club, both in terms of any restrictions that may in practice occur, but also what the club expects of that young player in terms of his conduct, his diet, the way he conducts himself around the training ground. All of those things are very important, and there are certainly real examples of best practice which a number of our clubs employ, and we have to accept that not all clubs may be at that level, but I think we can do further work to address that.
Thanks so much. Can I just clarify a couple of things? We've talked a bit about the freedom of youngsters to choose, whether it's in terms of participating in schools football or whether, to move to another club, whatever, and some of the constraints on them. Does that apply to Premiership clubs? And does that apply, for example, to Barcelona, Inter Milan, some of the other, big clubs throughout Europe?
Yes, it does. A similar system applies across the world, and FIFA, the world governing body, has in place regulations that affect the transfer of players at those ages. I think the big difference between the FIFA system and our own system is that the FIFA system kicks in at the point that a player transfers from one club to another, but a payment won't be triggered until that player signs his first professional contract. That said, the amounts that FIFA use are much higher than those that are used in Scotland. So there's a trade-off between the system that we have, where there are lower amounts paid on transfer, and the system that FIFA use for any cross-border transfer, where it's higher amounts on the point of a player signing a pro contract. But we shouldn't kid ourselves. The fact that those payments are triggered by the player moving across from one club to another, that all clubs have to take account of that, and do take account of that before they sign that player. So in effect, the restrictions that we've talked about that apply to players, because the acquiring club will be under a duty to pay some training compensation, those restrictions apply worldwide. They're certainly not in any way unique to Scotland. They apply to every single transfer cross-border.
It applies to constraints on youngsters taking part in school football?
I have to say I'm not familiar with the rules and regulations of different associations as regards participation in schools football, but certainly as regards a compensation payment to that club for the training that club has provided, that is a system that applies worldwide.
Can I ask, we've been talking about boys football, what about girls football? Well, I know. I mean, I'm very much aware of that. I mean, in terms of the kind of incentives and clubs' involvement, I mean, this particular scheme is not, no girls are involved in this particular scheme?
Girls and women's football is very much in the development stage, if you like. There are obviously not as many girls playing compared to boys, and in terms of the professional status, girls and women's football isn't at that level, so we don't have the same sort of issues that we're talking about this afternoon. But to echo the Minister's point, girls and women's football in this country is doing very well, and they've reached their highest ever UEFA and FIFA rankings within the last 6 months.
Absolutely. Been to many matches in the past.
Can I just ask, I know that you'll be pushed for time, but can I just ask a question probably to the Minister and to SPL and the SFA? From parliamentary responses, we know that £12.5 million was invested in the SFA between 2006-07 and 2008-09. I wonder if I could specifically ask the Minister if you think that we, the taxpayer, get good value from that investment, what we got for that investment. What we're investing now, you said that more money was going into to football. And specifically, if we can ask the SFA and the SPL, just what did you invest that money in? How was that shared amongst the member clubs and the different priorities that you have? And perhaps you could just say, following up the convener's question, just how much of that £12.5 million actually went into women's football?
Do you want, I mean, I can give some general comments on that. I mean, as I said earlier on, the first half of the Youth Action Plan was funded primarily through big lottery funds. Now we're halfway through. The second half, starting from April, will be funded primarily through Scottish Government funds. In terms of what's been delivered, I mean, a lot has been delivered, and Stuart will be able to give more detail on that. I think where we would want to see, and this is some of the detail that Sports Scotland and the SFA are in discussions about at the moment, is for that to be far more open and transparent, so people can see what has been delivered where, by whom, to have clear targets in terms of what the priorities are. And that's not to be critical in any way, because if all of that will be there in one shape or another. I think it just needs to be far clearer. And what we've tasked Sports Scotland to do in their discussions, which have been extremely positive with the SFA, is to bring more transparency around that, and to be very robust and clear about what the targets are for participation, for delivery of the more elite end of the sport, in the same way as we would do with any other governing body in any other sport. And certainly I think that just to reiterate, those discussions have been extremely positive, and I think we're almost entering a kind of new era, if you like, around the development of football, particularly youth development, where there are huge opportunities. I mean, in terms of the investment in girls' women's football, the cashback initiative has given particular attention to funding women and girls football. Having said that, I think Henry McLeish in his report made clear that there could be more done around the development of girls and women's football. That's something, again, Sports Scotland have been talking to the SFA about, giving that priority within the resources that the SFA receive. So I think, I'm sure that we're given the detail, there is a significant resource going into football, some